Right now, as you watch this video, something extraordinary is happening inside your skull. 100 billion neurons, roughly the same number as stars in the Milky Way galaxy, are firing, connecting, communicating through trillions of synaptic connections at speeds of up to 400 kilometers per hour. And somehow, from that electrochemical activity, from those biological signals passing between cells, something emerges. Your experience of this moment, the feeling of sitting where you are sitting, the sound of this voice, the sense that you are here, watching, thinking, aware, consciousness, the most familiar thing in the universe, the only thing you have ever directly experienced, and simultaneously the most mysterious. Because here is what science cannot explain. Why does it feel like anything at all? Why is there an experience of being you rather than just biological machinery processing information in the dark? This question, called the hard problem of consciousness, is considered by many philosophers and scientists to be the deepest unsolved problem in all of human knowledge. Harder than dark energy, harder than quantum gravity, harder than the origin of the universe. Because at least with those problems, we know what we are looking for. With consciousness, we don't even know what kind of answer would count as an explanation. And in the last 3 decades, a small but serious group of physicists and neuroscientists have proposed something extraordinary. Something that connects the mystery of consciousness, the question of why there is an inner experience of being alive, to the deepest and strangest features of quantum mechanics. Something that suggests your mind may not be a product of classical physics operating in isolation. Something that suggests consciousness, whatever it is, may be woven into the fabric of reality itself, at the quantum level, at the level where particles exist in superpositions, where measurement creates reality, where entanglement connects distant objects instantaneously, where the universe, at its most fundamental level, refuses to behave the way common sense demands. What if consciousness is not just the product of a brain? What if it is something the universe does? To understand why quantum mechanics has been brought into the study of consciousness, you first need to understand why consciousness is such a profound problem in the first place. The philosopher David Chalmers introduced the term hard problem of consciousness in 1995. And the distinction he drew between the easy problems and the hard problem is one of the most clarifying ideas in the study of the mind. The easy problems of consciousness are not actually easy. They include explaining how the brain processes sensory information, how it integrates information from different sources, how it directs attention, how it controls behavior, how it distinguishes sleep from wakefulness. These are extraordinarily complex neuroscientific and computational problems. They will take decades or centuries of research to fully solve, but they are easy in a specific sense. They are mechanistic. They can, in principle, be explained by describing the functions of neurons, circuits, and networks, by understanding what the brain does. The hard problem is different. Even if you completely solved all the easy problems, even if you had a perfect, complete description of every neuron firing in a brain, every signal passing between cells, every computational process occurring, you would still not have explained why there is a subjective experience accompanying all of that activity. Why does it feel like something to see the color red? Why is there an inner experience of pain rather than just a neural signal that causes avoidance behavior? Why is there a sense of being a first-person perspective, a feeling of presence rather than just biological machinery operating in the dark. The hard problem is the question of why physical processes give rise to subjective experience. Why there is something it is like to be you, and it is genuinely, deeply, embarrassingly unsolved. The dominant view in neuroscience and philosophy, called physicalism or materialism, holds that consciousness is a product of the brain. That subjective experience emerges from sufficiently complex information processing, that when neurons fire in the right patterns, consciousness arises as a natural consequence. This view may be correct, but it has not explained the hard problem. It has not explained why physical processes give rise to experience. It has simply asserted that they do, and focused on understanding the physical processes, hoping that the explanation will eventually emerge. It hasn't. And some scientists, frustrated by the failure of purely classical approaches, have turned to quantum mechanics for answers. The connection between quantum mechanics and consciousness is not arbitrary. It emerges from a specific feature of quantum mechanics that has puzzled physicists since the theory was developed in the 1920s. The measurement problem. We discussed this briefly in our multiverse video. But in the context of consciousness, it deserves a much deeper look. In quantum mechanics, a particle does not have definite properties until it is measured. Before measurement, it exists in a superposition, a combination of all possible states simultaneously. An electron is not spinning up or spinning down. It is both, in a precise mathematical combination described by its wave function. When you measure the electron, when you interact with it in a way that forces it to reveal its spin, the wave function collapses. The superposition becomes one definite state. But here is the question that has never been satisfactorily answered. What counts as a measurement? In the mathematics of quantum mechanics, everything is a quantum system. The electron is a quantum system. The measuring device is a quantum system. The scientist looking at the device is a quantum system. The air molecules interacting with the scientist are quantum systems. If everything is quantum, if the Schrödinger equation applies to everything, then why do we never observe superpositions at the macroscopic level? Why does the measuring device always show a definite result? Why does the scientist always see one outcome? The standard answer, called the Copenhagen interpretation, says that the act of measurement causes collapse. But it never defines what counts as a measurement precisely enough to avoid the question. And in 1939, the physicist John von Neumann made an observation that started one of the most controversial threads in the history of physics. He noted that you can push the boundary between quantum and classical, between superposition and collapse, arbitrarily far up the measurement chain. The electron is quantum. The detector is quantum. The scientist's eyes are quantum. The scientist's brain is quantum. The only place the chain seems to end, the only thing that is definitively not a quantum superposition, is the conscious experience of the scientist. The only place collapse seems to necessarily occur is at the level of conscious observation. This led some early quantum pioneers, including Eugene Wigner, one of the most distinguished physicists of the 20th century, to propose something extraordinary. That consciousness causes collapse, that the act of conscious observation, not just physical interaction, but subjective experience, is what collapses the quantum wave function and produces a definite reality. This is called the consciousness causes collapse interpretation of quantum mechanics. And it is deeply controversial. Most physicists today reject it. The many worlds interpretation, which we discussed in our multiverse video, avoids any role for consciousness by saying, collapse never happens. Decoherence theory explains why macroscopic superpositions are never observed without invoking consciousness at all. But the idea planted a seed. It suggested that consciousness and quantum mechanics might be connected in a deep way, and it motivated some of the most creative and controversial thinking in modern science. In 1989, the mathematician and physicist Roger Penrose, one of the most brilliant minds in modern science, Stephen Hawking's longtime collaborator, published a book called The Emperor's New Mind. In it, he made a radical argument. Human consciousness cannot be explained by classical computation. His argument was technical, rooted in mathematical logic and Gödel's incompleteness theorems, but the conclusion was striking. Whatever produces conscious understanding in human minds, it is not the kind of computation that classical computers perform. It is something else, something that goes beyond classical algorithms. And the only place in physics where Penrose could find a mechanism capable of producing this something else was quantum mechanics. Specifically, a hypothetical process he called objective reduction, the collapse of quantum superpositions by the geometry of space-time itself. Not collapse caused by measurement or by environmental decoherence, but collapse caused by the gravitational self-energy of a superposition reaching a critical threshold. Penrose's objective reduction was not mainstream quantum mechanics. It was a speculative proposal, a suggestion that quantum gravity plays a role in collapsing wave functions, operating at the boundary between quantum mechanics and general relativity. But where in the brain could quantum superpositions survive long enough to do anything useful? Brains are warm and wet. Quantum superpositions are extraordinarily fragile. They are destroyed by interactions with the environment, a process called decoherence. In the warm, wet, noisy environment of a living cell, most physicists assumed quantum effects would be washed out far too quickly to play any role in brain function. Enter Stuart Hameroff. An anesthesiologist at the University of Arizona, Hameroff had been studying the structures inside neurons for years. Specifically, he had been studying microtubules, tiny protein tubes that form the structural skeleton of cells, including neurons. Microtubules are extraordinarily regular, precisely structured protein assemblies. They are involved in cell division, in transport within cells, and, Hameroff proposed, potentially in information processing within neurons. Hameroff proposed that microtubules could maintain quantum superpositions long enough for Penrose's objective reduction to occur. That the regular, ordered structure of tubulin proteins, the building blocks of microtubules, could provide an environment sheltered enough from decoherence for quantum computations to take place. Penrose and Hameroff joined forces. Together they developed a theory of consciousness called orchestrated objective reduction, Orch-OR. In Orch-OR, quantum superpositions develop in tubulin proteins within microtubules inside neurons. These superpositions are orchestrated, shaped by biological processes, and they collapse through Penrose's objective reduction mechanism. Each collapse is a moment of proto-conscious experience. Accumulated over time, these moments give rise to the stream of consciousness. The theory is extraordinary in its ambition. It connects neuroscience, quantum mechanics, and general relativity in a single framework. It proposes a specific physical mechanism for consciousness, one that is in principle testable, at least partially, and it has been controversial from the moment it was proposed. Most neuroscientists reject it. The brain is too warm and wet, they argue, for quantum coherence to survive long enough to matter. Decoherence occurs in femtoseconds, millionths of a billionth of a second, far too fast for orchestrated quantum computations to influence neural activity. Penrose and Hameroff dispute this. They argue that microtubules may be more sheltered from decoherence than critics assume, and they point to experimental evidence, including studies by Anirban Bandyopadhyay at the National Institute for Materials Science in Japan, suggesting that quantum vibrations in microtubules are real and may be relevant to neural function. The debate is unresolved. Orch is not confirmed. But it is not dismissed by all serious scientists either. It is a genuine, testable scientific proposal, and it represents the most detailed attempt ever made to connect quantum physics to consciousness. The idea that quantum effects play a role in biology was once considered obviously wrong. Brains are warm. Quantum effects require cold. End of story. But in the last 2 decades, something remarkable has happened. Quantum effects have been found, confirmed, and measured in living biological systems. Not in neurons, not in brains, but in processes so fundamental to life that their existence challenges the assumption that biology is purely classical. The first and most spectacular example is photosynthesis. When a photon of light hits a photosynthetic antenna complex, the molecular machinery in plant and bacterial cells that captures sunlight, something extraordinary happens. The energy of the photon does not simply diffuse randomly through the antenna complex until it either reaches the reaction center or is lost. It travels as a quantum wave, simultaneously exploring multiple pathways through the antenna complex in superposition, the way a quantum particle explores all possible paths simultaneously. This quantum coherence allows the energy to find the most efficient route to the reaction center with extraordinary efficiency. In 2007, a team at the University of California, Berkeley published evidence of quantum coherence in photosynthesis. The discovery was stunning. Quantum effects, operating in a warm, wet, biological system, were helping plants capture sunlight more efficiently than any classical process could achieve. The finding has been debated and refined in the years since. The exact role of quantum coherence in photosynthesis is still not fully resolved, but the basic result stands. Life uses quantum mechanics. The second example is bird navigation. Many species of migratory birds navigate using Earth's magnetic field with extraordinary precision. For decades, the mechanism was unknown. Then, in the 1970s, the physicist Klaus Schulten proposed that the magnetic sense might involve a quantum mechanical process called a radical pair mechanism. In radical pair mechanisms, pairs of electrons with correlated spins, quantum entanglement, interact with magnetic fields in ways that depend on the orientation of those fields. The chemical reactions involving radical pairs are sensitive to magnetic field direction. Subsequent research has confirmed that a protein called cryptochrome, found in the eyes of migratory birds, likely uses exactly this mechanism. Quantum entanglement in a bird's eye, helping it navigate by sensing the direction of Earth's magnetic field. Quantum entanglement in a living creature's eye, used for navigation. The third example is enzyme catalysis. Enzymes, the molecular machines that drive virtually every chemical reaction in living cells, achieve their extraordinary catalytic efficiency, partly through quantum tunneling. Protons and electrons tunnel through energy barriers that classical particles could not cross. This tunneling effect dramatically accelerates reactions that would otherwise be far too slow to sustain life. Quantum tunneling. In every living cell, all the time. Life, it turns out, is deeply quantum, not in some vague metaphorical sense, in a precise, measurable, physical sense, which means the question of whether quantum effects play a role in the brain, in consciousness, is no longer as easily dismissed as it once was. If plants use quantum coherence for photosynthesis, if birds use quantum entanglement for navigation, if enzymes use quantum tunneling for catalysis, then why not neurons? Why not the brain? Why not consciousness? There is a third approach to the quantum consciousness question, one that is older than quantum mechanics itself, one that has been dismissed for centuries as mystical nonsense, and that is now being taken seriously by a growing number of philosophers and physicists. Panpsychism. The view that consciousness, or proto-consciousness, or the capacity for experience, is a fundamental feature of reality, present not just in brains, not just in living things, but in all matter, in all of nature, in electrons and quarks and photons, not in the sense that electrons are conscious in the way you are conscious, but in the sense that there is something it is like to be an electron, some infinitesimally simple form of inner experience that is as fundamental to its nature as its mass or its charge. Panpsychism sounds bizarre. It sounds like the kind of thing that belongs in ancient philosophy or New Age spirituality, not in a serious scientific discussion. But consider the alternative. The standard materialist view holds that consciousness emerges from non-conscious matter, that brains, made of atoms that have no inner experience, somehow produce an inner experience when arranged in the right way. This is called emergentism, and it faces a fundamental challenge. How does subjective experience emerge from non-experiential matter? At what point in the complexity of a physical system does experience suddenly appear? Is a single neuron conscious? Is 100 neurons? 1 billion? What is the threshold? And why should arranging non-experiential matter in complex patterns produce experience at all? There is no law of physics that says complexity produces consciousness. There is no equation in which experience emerges from information processing. Panpsychism avoids this problem by denying the premise. Consciousness does not emerge from non-conscious matter. Consciousness was always there, in the simplest constituents of reality. What complex systems like brains do is not produce consciousness from nothing. They combine and integrate the simple proto-conscious experiences of their constituents into the rich, unified consciousness of an experiencing subject. This combination problem, how simple experiences combine into unified complex experiences, is panpsychism's own deep challenge. It is not obviously easier to solve than the hard problem of emergence. But panpsychism has a serious advocate in modern physics. The physicist Max Tegmark, whose mathematical universe hypothesis we discussed in our multiverse video, has proposed a version of panpsychism he calls perceptronium. He suggests that consciousness is a state of matter, like solid, liquid, or gas, defined by specific information processing properties. Matter that is conscious is matter whose information is processed in a specific, integrated, self-referential way. This view connects to a theory developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi called integrated information theory, IIT proposes that consciousness is identical to integrated information. A system is conscious to the degree that it integrates information, to the degree that the whole contains more information than the sum of its parts. The measure of integrated information is called phi, the Greek letter. A system with 0 phi, like a collection of disconnected parts, has no consciousness. A system with very high phi, like a human brain, whose global integration of information is extraordinarily complex, has rich consciousness. And crucially, IIT makes no restriction to biological systems. Any physical system with non-zero phi is conscious to some degree. Neurons, computers, perhaps even elementary particles, with their minuscule but non-zero phi. IIT is controversial. It has been criticized on multiple grounds, for being unfalsifiable, for making counterintuitive predictions about the consciousness of simple systems, for defining consciousness in terms of information theory in a way that may not capture what consciousness actually is. But it is taken seriously by serious scientists. Tononi's work is published in major peer-reviewed journals. It is discussed and debated at the frontiers of neuroscience and philosophy of mind, and it represents one of the most ambitious attempts ever made to make consciousness a physical, measurable, quantitative property of the universe. There is a phenomenon in quantum mechanics called the quantum Zeno effect, named after the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea, famous for paradoxes about motion. The quantum Zeno effect states that a quantum system that is continuously observed cannot evolve. Or more precisely, the more frequently you observe a quantum system, the more slowly it evolves. In the limit of continuous observation, it stops evolving altogether. This is not a metaphor. It has been confirmed experimentally. Unstable quantum systems that would normally decay, radioactive atoms, excited states of molecules, can be prevented from decaying by sufficiently frequent observation. Watching a quantum system keeps it frozen in its current state. The physicist Henry Stapp, a quantum theorist who worked with Werner Heisenberg in the 1970s, has proposed that the quantum Zeno effect may be the mechanism through which conscious attention influences brain activity. Stapp's argument is this: the brain, at the quantum level, faces a choice among multiple possible quantum states, multiple possible patterns of neural activity. Quantum mechanics allows for a superposition of possible states. Classical physics alone would allow the brain to evolve to whichever state is mechanistically determined by prior conditions. But conscious attention, the subjective act of focusing on something, may act as repeated quantum observation. By repeatedly observing the quantum state of neural processes, conscious attention may, through the quantum Zeno effect, hold the brain in a particular quantum state, sustaining certain patterns of neural activity, influencing which thoughts, which intentions, which actions emerge from the quantum substrate. In other words, conscious attention may be physically real in a quantum mechanical sense. It may literally hold certain brain states in place through the act of observation. And this, Stapp argues, is the physical basis of free will. Not libertarian free will, not the ability to violate the laws of physics, but a genuine form of influence of mind on matter, of conscious intention on physical outcomes, through quantum mechanics. Stapp's views are controversial. Many physicists argue that decoherence destroys quantum superpositions in the brain far too fast for the quantum Zeno effect to be relevant. That by the time conscious attention could act, the the quantum superpositions have already collapsed into classical states through environmental interaction. Stapp disputes this. The debate continues. But the stakes are extraordinary, because if Stapp is right, if conscious attention genuinely influences brain states through quantum mechanics, then consciousness is not just a passive observer of a physical universe that would proceed identically in its absence. It is a participant, an active, physically real influence on the quantum substrate of reality. Mind and matter intertwined at the most fundamental level. If consciousness is fundamental, if panpsychism is correct in some form, then a profound question follows. Is the universe conscious? Not in the sense of a personal God, not in any theological sense, but in the sense that integrated information, proto-consciousness, exists throughout the fabric of reality. The physicist Freeman Dyson, one of the great physicists of the 20th century, wrote in his memoir Disturbing the Universe that he did not feel like a stranger in the cosmos, that the universe showed, in some sense, an awareness of his presence. He was not making a mystical claim, he was making a physical one, that the laws of physics, the mathematical structures that govern the universe, are not indifferent to the existence of mind. The physicist John Wheeler went further. Wheeler, who coined the terms black hole and wormhole, developed a view of the universe he called participatory. He proposed that the universe is not a machine grinding through predefined states. It is a participatory universe, one that requires observers to bring it into being, not in a solipsistic sense, not that your individual mind creates reality, but that observation, consciousness, is a fundamental feature of the universe's self-realization. That without observers, the quantum wave function would never collapse. That the universe exists in a state of superposition until it is observed into existence. Wheeler's late-in-life view, which he called it from bit, proposed that the physical world, it, derives from information, bit. That the universe is fundamentally informational. That reality is made of yes or no answers to yes or no questions. That existence is constituted by the act of observation and measurement. In this picture, consciousness is not an accident of evolution that arose late in cosmic history. It is woven into the structure of the universe from the beginning. The universe, in some sense, required consciousness to observe it into existence. This is deeply speculative. Wheeler himself acknowledged it as a vision rather than a theory. It makes no precise predictions. It is not falsifiable in the conventional scientific sense, but it is taken seriously as a philosophical framework by physicists and philosophers who have thought carefully about the measurement problem and the role of the observer in quantum mechanics. And it raises, in its most extreme form, the possibility that consciousness is not just connected to the quantum universe. It is what the quantum universe is for. One of the most powerful arguments that consciousness has a physical basis, and one of the strongest pieces of evidence that quantum effects may be involved, comes from the study of anesthesia. General anesthesia is one of the most remarkable phenomena in medicine. A person is given a drug. Within seconds, consciousness vanishes completely. The person is not asleep. They are unconscious. They feel nothing. They experience nothing. The lights go out, and then the drug wears off, and consciousness returns. Just as suddenly, just as completely. We do anesthesia millions of times a year. It is routine, safe, and extraordinarily reliable. But we do not fully understand how it works. We know that anesthetic molecules, a chemically diverse group, with different structures and different interactions, all produce the same result. They eliminate consciousness. How? The classical view is that anesthetics work by disrupting the electrical activity of neurons, by altering ion channel function, by reducing neural firing. But Stuart Hameroff, whose Orch theory we discussed earlier, has pointed out something extraordinary. Anesthetic molecules, despite their chemical diversity, share one property. They all bind to hydrophobic pockets inside proteins. Hydrophobic pockets are regions of proteins that exclude water. They are environments where quantum effects, including quantum coherence, can potentially survive longer than in the surrounding aqueous environment. Hameroff proposes that anesthetics eliminate consciousness by disrupting quantum processes in these hydrophobic pockets, specifically in the tubulin proteins of microtubules. When anesthetics bind to the hydrophobic pockets, they disturb the quantum coherence that Orch proposes is necessary for consciousness. The quantum processes stop, the moments of objective reduction cease, and consciousness vanishes. This is a testable prediction, and experiments by Hameroff and colleagues have found evidence that anesthetic molecules do indeed affect quantum processes in tubulin proteins in ways consistent with this prediction. Not conclusive evidence, the interpretation is disputed. But the data exists, the experiments have been done, and the results are at least consistent with the quantum consciousness hypothesis. The fact that we can turn consciousness off with a chemical and turn it back on again is itself profound. It suggests that consciousness, whatever it is, has a precise, but in the context of quantum consciousness, it becomes relevant. If consciousness is fundamental, if it is, as some panpsychists propose, the basic substance of reality rather than an emergent property of matter, then the question of what reality ultimately is becomes deeply intertwined with the question of what consciousness ultimately is. The physicist John Wheeler's it from bit proposal, that reality is constituted by information, by the answers to yes or no questions, resonates with the simulation hypothesis. A simulated universe is, at its deepest level, information, bits, computations, and a panpsychist universe, one in which consciousness is fundamental, is also, in some formulations, an informational universe, one in which experience is primary and matter is secondary. Are these two pictures compatible? Could a simulated universe be a conscious universe? Could the computational substrate of a simulation be itself conscious, making the simulation not just a model of a universe, but an actual universe, experienced from the inside? These questions are at the extreme frontier of speculation. They are not science in the conventional sense. They are not falsifiable with current tools. But they point toward something important. The question of consciousness, of why there is something it is like to be you, and the question of what reality fundamentally is, of why there is something rather than nothing, may be the same question, asked from different directions, the inside view and the outside view of the same mystery. Here is the honest state of the science. Quantum consciousness is not confirmed. None of the theories we have discussed, Orch, IIT, Stapp's quantum xeno-free will, panpsychism, has been confirmed by experiment in a way that the scientific mainstream accepts as definitive. The mainstream view in neuroscience is that consciousness is a product of classical neural computation, that the brain is a biological computer, extraordinarily complex, extraordinarily powerful, and that consciousness emerges from the computational processes of neurons interacting through synapses. The mainstream view in physics is that quantum effects in the brain are irrelevant to consciousness. That decoherence destroys quantum superpositions in biological systems far too fast for them to influence neural activity at the level relevant to consciousness. These mainstream views may be correct, but they have not solved the hard problem. They have not explained why physical processes, classical or quantum, give rise to subjective experience, why there is something it is like to be a brain processing information. The hard problem remains hard, and that unresolved hardness is why serious scientists, Penrose, Hameroff, Tononi, Stapp, Tegmark, continue to explore quantum approaches. Not because quantum mechanics is obviously the answer, but because classical approaches have not yet provided one. The philosopher of mind David Chalmers, who named the hard problem, has said that he considers the problem genuinely open, that he does not know whether consciousness will ultimately be explained classically or quantum mechanically, or by some entirely new framework that neither classical physics nor quantum mechanics currently provides. He may be right about the third option. The understanding of consciousness may require a revolution in physics as fundamental as quantum mechanics itself was in the early 20th century. A new framework, not yet imagined, not yet formulated, that changes our understanding of the relationship between mind and matter as profoundly as relativity changed our understanding of space and time. We are not there yet. We are at the beginning. And the beginning, the moment when the deep questions are clearly visible, but the answers are not yet in sight, is always the most exciting place to be in science. 100 billion neurons firing right now in the darkness inside your skull, producing somehow the experience of being you, the experience of reading these words, of thinking, of wondering, of being aware that you are aware. We do not know how. We do not know why physical processes, whether classical or quantum, give rise to this, to the inner light of consciousness, to the feeling of being present in a universe that, as far as we can tell, contains mostly darkness. But we are asking. And the asking, the fact that the universe has produced creatures capable of turning their awareness back on itself and asking why there is awareness at all, is perhaps the most extraordinary fact in all of science, more extraordinary than dark energy, more extraordinary than black holes, more extraordinary than the cosmic web. Because all of those things, the galaxies, the forces, the structures, the entire 13.8 billion year history of the universe, existed before anyone was there to wonder about them. You are what the universe produced to wonder. And the question of what you are, of what this experience of being you actually is at the deepest physical level, is the question that connects neuroscience and quantum mechanics and philosophy and physics into a single, unified mystery. The most important mystery, the one you are living inside, right now.